just, you know what, I'm just going to rip the Band-Aid off. Idioms are pretty helpful sometimes. Idioms, when I was a kid, I thought that was an insult. It's not. It's just a phrase, something that you say that only makes sense in the right context, or if you're a native speaker of that language. You might have heard some idioms before, right? Go big or go home. Risk it for the biscuit, right? No? How about fortune favors the bold? Yeah, some of you maybe a little older. How about you miss 100% of the shots you don't take? Yeah, okay. Anyone know nothing ventured, nothing gained? Yeah, okay, there's a few more, probably because it's a little bit of an older phrase saying. Not that I'm saying you're older, I'm just saying it's been around a while. You guys, come on. The truth is, when we talk about idioms, when we talk about those, you'll recognize most of those are in the same vein. They mean roughly the same thing, that you need to take a risk if there's going to be a reward. That maybe that's going to be uncomfortable for people, and some of us don't live in that uncomfortable, so we're like, that's a good phrase for someone else. But Paul pretty much embodies this continuously throughout this book of Acts. As we see everything he does, he considers it, man, I'm going to venture into that. It doesn't matter what it is because there's a gain to be had, and that gain is the spreading of the gospel. And he does it time and time again. He is not one to back down from any challenge. He continues to press forward and to press on. And it's helpful because it's a good example, it's a good illustration for many of us. Except for when it's not. Because sometimes that's not the right course of action. Sometimes you need to do something a little different. And Acts 19 is wonderful because as much as Paul's pressed forward and pressed on and ventured much, he has not necessarily come to the place where he is stopped or paused yet. Right? Normally gets thrown out, he might even get stoned, and then he'll continue on. It's not that he isn't resolved, okay? It's not that he isn't resolved to the task that's at hand. It's not that he isn't willing to go to any length to reach what God has called him to do. And we've seen that throughout the narrative. If you'll pick up with me in Acts 19, we're going to begin in verse 21, which is right after where Josh left off. And it says, after these events, and just to remind you, the events that we're talking about are the sweaty rags being carried, and we're talking about book burning parties, and so we're talking about these things that God's been doing through the Spirit's power. He's been working mightily over the last 2 years. And it says, after these events, Paul resolved by the Spirit to pass through Macedonia and Achaia to go to Jerusalem. After I've been there, he said, it is necessary for me to see Rome as well. After sending to Macedonia 2 of those who assisted him, Timothy and Erastus, he himself stayed in Asia for a while. Paul is one that continues to be resolved for what the Lord calls him to do. The Lord tells him to do something, and he does it. He doesn't wait. He doesn't delay. He is just one who continues to press forward, except for here. This is a weird, unique thing. I don't know if Luke's intentionally using this narrative, this story. I don't know if he's setting it up this way, but he says, Paul is resolved by the Spirit, and that word resolved means literally like to put down, right? It's an idiom in and of itself. The word resolved, it's to put down, to place upon the heart or mind, right? So it's the Spirit's resolved him, so it can be that the Spirit resolved him by putting it in his heart, or that Paul is resolved by the Spirit. He's dedicated, he's devoted, he's going forward. But anyways, he's placed it in his mind what he's going to do. And then he doesn't quite do it. Rather than run off out of Ephesus, find a quick escape, he sends 2 of the disciples ahead of him, much like Jesus did, right, when he sent out the 70. He sent them out in pairs. He sent them ahead of him to the towns he would be going to. And so we see Paul kind of imitating this, modeling this, and then he waits for a while. And that's a weird thing for Paul to do. Unless directed by the Holy Spirit, Paul is not one who tends to wait. And so, no, it doesn't say Paul was led by the Spirit to wait here. It doesn't say he stopped here because the Spirit told him to. It just says he stopped and he remained here for a time while he sent the disciples ahead of him. Okay, while he sent Timothy and Erastus. Timothy we know a great deal about. Erastus we know very little of. But Luke isn't so concerned about describing every character in the narrative. He's just wanting to ground it in historical context. And so he continues to provide names of people who are with Paul in his journeys. Right? Although he doesn't include himself. The author never will say his own name. He will just simply switch from the they to the we to indicate that he's picked up in the journey. So here we see Timothy and Erastus going ahead of Paul, and he's going to wait for a while, and that is atypical. That is not Paul's way of normally doing it. I have to suspect it's the Holy Spirit. It doesn't say it directly, and so I'm not going to say that conclusively. But he waits, and he pauses. And you guys all know how much I like to wait and pause. This is good for me. I'm like, yes, Paul is setting a good example that I want to follow. And he doesn't venture forward quite yet. But let's see what causes him to move onward. Let's pick up in verse 23. Now, about that time, there was a major disturbance about the way. That's right, Christianity, the way. For a person named Demetrius, a silversmith who made silver shrines of Artemis, provided a great deal of business for the craftsmen. When he had assembled them, as well as the workers engaged in this type of business, he said, "Men, you know that our prosperity is derived from this business. You see and hear that not only in Ephesus, but in almost all of Asia, this man Paul has persuaded and misled a considerable number of people by saying that gods made by hand are not gods. Not only do we run a risk that our business may be discredited, but also that the temple of the great goddess Artemis may be despised and her magnificence come to the verge of ruin, the very one all of Asia and the world worship." When they heard this, they were filled with rage and began to cry out, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians!" So the city was filled with confusion, and they rushed together into the amphitheater, dragging along Gaius and Aristarchus, Macedonians who were Paul's traveling companions. Although Paul wanted to go in before them, the disciples did not let him. Even some of the provincial officials of Asia, who were his friends, sent word to him, pleading with him not to venture into the amphitheater. Some were shouting one thing and some another, because the assembly was in confusion, and most of them did not know why they had come together. This is not new to Paul. This emotional outburst, this rage that is filling the city, this is nothing new. Paul has been in this situation before. He has been in this circumstance before. Okay, so what Luke's doing in bringing up this event and why he brings up this event is unique because ultimately we would think it's building towards a climax, that Luke is using this event to get Paul out of the city, and that's not actually what he's doing. He's describing what is occurring in Ephesus at this time. He's talking about this temple, this Artemis, the goddess, Diana to the Romans, right? This goddess of prosperity, of provision, of abundance. And he's wrapping the narrative around this Paul, yes, but not directly. Because Demetrius is talking about Paul. He's saying the reason why this problem exists is because Paul exists, and he has been for the last 2 years. Paul's been spreading misinformation, he says. Paul's been the one who is persuading people not to worship our goddess. And he says not just the people in Ephesus, he gives them credit for all of Asia. Do we recognize the significance of that? What Paul has done in 2 years' time without social media, without news like the way we have it, he has increased the gospel throughout the entire region. That's an apostle. That's one who's pressing forward. That's one who is not going to back down. And this is the Paul we see time and time again. He's successful. This is the Paul that even the demons knew his name. Remember last week? The demons say, "I'm familiar with this name, this guy Paul. Yeah, I know Jesus. Paul, that guy I've heard of, but you guys I don't know." Paul has so many enemies, so many people that know his name, that both in the physical realm and in the spiritual realm, they're talking about him. And that would lead anyone to believe that this narrative is truly about Paul. Right? When you have everyone talking about you, some of us really like that. And some of us are really uncomfortable with that. Okay, but if you're the one who typically takes the nothing ventured, nothing gained, you are more likely the one that enjoys that likes that. See, Paul is in a place where he's well known, where people know who he is. People are expecting things from him. And he says, you know what? I want to go in there. He says, this riot, it arose because of me. It's because of my name, because of what I'm doing. I want to get in there. I want to address that. I want to take care of that. And I'm the perfect person too because it's about me. But is it? You see, I don't know that it really is. And I think Paul may have suffered time to time. I'm not saying all the time, but the main character syndrome seems to be running strong in this narrative. And if you don't know what that is, it's probably because you don't play video games. But in video games, you usually have a main character, and that's the one you play as, and everyone else is a side character, a supporting character. Happens in narratives too. And when you have main character syndrome, you are the main character. Everyone else is a supporting character, and because of that, they don't matter as much. The narrative's about me. And Paul could easily arrive at this point because everyone is talking about him. He could say, this is all about me. This riot's about me. Naturally, I should be the one to step in. And what do the disciples do? They stop him. Now, I don't know Paul as one to be stopped so far in the narrative, right? Luke has not described Paul as someone who simply says, no, stop, and he just stops. He presses forward. He pushes on. He is the one who got dragged out of the city after being stoned. They thought he was dead. And what does he do? He stands up, dusts himself off, and goes right back in. Some disciples cannot just stop Paul. But he is stopped. And that's significant because that tells us that Paul is at the place where though he might think he needs to be the one to go in and address them, he is still willing to listen to the counsel of others. He has given people authority in his life to tell him no. And I look at that and I think, man, that's amazing because I'm not Paul, but if I was, I would struggle with being told no because I struggle with being told no now and I'm not Paul. I'm not well known like he is. And so I think about it and I think, man, if Paul had people in his life, if Paul had people in the circle that were willing to tell him no, and he gave them the authority to say, okay, you've told me no, now I'm going to listen. How valuable could that be for each and every one of us? For us to give people the ability to tell us stop, to tell us maybe pause, to maybe tell us that's not the best course of action. Maybe we are so thick-headed we need it. You're not the main character. Life is not all about you. I think that's valuable for each and every one of us. And maybe some of you already have that person, and you're sitting here and you're thinking, yeah, that's me. I'm the one who is doing that for other people. Or maybe I have this person that does that for me. But I would suspect because of human nature, several of you sitting in this room probably don't give anyone that ability. There's some who struggle with the idea that if I don't venture anything, I'm not gaining anything, and so I must press on. I must take every risk. I must go forward. And you can almost become addicted to that risk, to the pushing on, to the pushing forward, to the achievement, the accomplishment. You take pride in the fact that you can stick your chin out and take a hit, that you never throw in the towel. And you think any sort of backing down is ultimately weakness. If that's you, you need these people in your life who will tell you no. But it's not just you. Each and every one of us need people in our life that will tell us no. That will plead with us, stop, wait. You don't have to be the one to address this. You don't have to be the one to get this done. It's not all about you. And as I talk about that, you might have a name in mind, someone who already does this for you. I hope you do. I really do. But if you don't, now's the time to get someone. I don't mean that theoretically. I mean that literally right now. Because those of you who struggle with being told no, if I tell you to do it now and you wait 20, 30 minutes until you're out of here, you're likely not going to do it at all. It's just the nature of us. And so what I want to do is I want to give you a moment. Maybe you need to write a note. You're the type that likes to write. Pull out a notepad, pull out a piece of paper, write a note to someone. Say, I need you to be this person for me that tells me wait, that tells me slow down, that tells me life's not about me. Maybe you need to just pull out your phone and text someone that. You need to say, okay, I'm going to text so I'm appreciative. I want to let them know I appreciate the relationship, the friendship that we have, and I want to give them that right to tell me no. Maybe the person's in this room. That makes it even easier. You can just turn to your right or to your left or behind you or in front of you and say, hey, I need you. But I want to give you a moment to do this, because if I don't give you a moment right now, the likelihood that you'll do it's very low. Even the likelihood that you'll do it right now is very low. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm literally going to give you a minute. Do this right now. Ask someone to be that person in your life who keeps you humble. Right now. You can do it in the room. You can text someone, pull out your phone. I'm serious. Do it right now. Sorry, I was making sure someone else was. No, I'm not. I was asking someone for my sake, because we all need it, every single one of us. Every single one of us needs someone who's going to remind us that it's not about us. And if we have a spouse, that comes very naturally. They're very kind, and they remind us, hey, it's not always about you. You can't always have your way. If we have kids, they oftentimes remind us they don't care about our way, and it's not about us. Right? So we naturally have some built in, but if you don't, man, that was your opportunity. It's gone. You never have it again. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. You didn't gain anything if you didn't do it. No, I'm kidding. But if we are willing to do that, if we're willing to have people tell us no, to tell us stop, what that leaves is the opportunity for someone else. Right? Because Paul is not going to be the one to solve this. He's not going to be the one to bring an end to this. It's not going to be him at all. And yet Luke, right, if this were truly about Paul, he would have continued the narrative, and then he would have just transitioned into what Paul did next. And instead, he goes through the rest of it to bring a conclusion to this matter, and it's not about Paul. It's about someone else who is able to keep calm, someone else who's able to keep a level head. Let's go on in verse 33. Some Jews in the crowd gave instruction to Alexander after they pushed him to the front. Motioning with his hand, Alexander wanted to make his defense to the people. But when they recognized that he was a Jew, they all shouted in unison for about 2 hours, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." When the city clerk had calmed the crowd down, he said, "People of Ephesus, what person is there who doesn't know that the city of the Ephesians is the temple guardian of the great Artemis and of the image that fell from heaven? Therefore, since these things are undeniable, you must keep calm and do not do anything rash. For you have brought these men here who are not temple robbers or blasphemers or of our goddess. So if Demetrius and the craftsmen who are with him have any case against anyone, the courts are in session and there are proconsuls. Let them bring charges against one another. But if you seek anything further, it must be decided in a legal assembly. In fact, we run a risk of being charged with rioting for what happened today, since there is no justification that we can give as a reason for this disturbance." After saying this, he dismissed the assembly. Now, I feel a little bit bad for Alexander, because it doesn't sound like he wanted to be there. He was kind of the sacrificial lamb in a way. They're like, "Here, you take care of it." They all pushed him forward to do it. And right, he motions and tries. He does his best by just trying to get attention. And they just shout him down. They just shout him down for 2 hours long. This is not something you practice for. It's not something you prepare for. It's not like Alexander stood up because he's the best one. He's like, "Yes, I'm going to end this." They simply pushed him to the front, and so he said, "Okay, I'll do my best." Right? I'll give it the old college try. And so he does, and it ends with just more shouting. He only escalated the situation, so much so that "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians" is chanted for 2 hours. Now, I'm sure some of you guys, unlike me, have been to a sporting event or a political event or some other thing where people chant and shout together. I don't know what it is, but I know it happens. And so I'll have to take your advice and your word for it. Have any of you been a part of one that was 2 hours you're chanting the same thing in unison? Anyone? No. See, there's no sports team that great. And there's certainly no politician that great. So we know that. So we're like, okay, no, none of us have ever chanted for 2 hours and shouting it. Just imagine how hoarse their voices were that day and the next day. I mean, that would have been a quiet day. That would have been kind of nice. But for 2 hours, they're shouting this in unison. Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. That seems really boring. I probably would have walked away because I would have been like, this is pointless. And yet, when they are emotionally tied together, when Demetrius has done this, and he's taken the anger of a few and he's multiplied it many times over, because people are beginning to empathize with one another. It's not their emotion, it's someone else's emotion, but it's feeding them, and so then they're angry. It's not their anger, it's their anger. But now it's my anger because it's their anger, and so it's our anger, and we're going to shout together and do this. And it doesn't take a lot to manipulate people's emotions. It doesn't take much. We see it happen all the time in our day and age. People manipulate the emotions of a group to control their activities and their actions. It's not hard. Manipulating people's emotions is pretty easy, especially when we're really great at jumping on the bandwagon of emotions and saying, yeah, I'm going to feel what everyone else feels, because then I feel significant because I'm a part of something more. And so the city clerk becomes the hero of this story. The city clerk is the only one to keep a level head in this situation and say, okay, let's address this reasonably and calmly. And of course, you all know when you're addressing angry people, that's exactly how it turns out. Never. I look at this story, I'm like, I don't understand. I get what he does. I get what he does. He calms them down first to the point where they can listen, and he says, you know what? We have a point of commonality. We all know that Artemis is great, that Ephesus is about Artemis, that the temple is here, that we are the temple guardians, that this is the point which everyone knows. So I'm not arguing with you on that. He finds that point of commonality. And then he says, you know what? These are not the guys. Like, yes, you have this grievance, you have this argument, but you have the wrong guys. They're not the name that you've been dropping of Paul. They're not. They're the wrong guys. You have the wrong men here. And he says, because you have the wrong men here, if you have a legal grievance, Demetrius and you silversmiths, you have a place you can go. There are courts in session. They will absolutely hear your case. Go there with the right case, though. So he says, you all have a good point, but you have the wrong guys. Go about it the legal way. And last of all, here's a threat. Rome will come in if we are rioting. There is no purpose for this. There is no reason for this. We are being emotional without any sort of resolution to this. What are we seeking about in this situation? And somehow, making these points, he manages to send the assembly away peacefully. I don't understand. I'm like, that looked way too easy. Way too easy. If every conflict was that easy, guess what? I wouldn't be conflict averse. Like, oh, there's a problem here. Let me just speak reasonably to you and it will go away. That's not how it happens most of the time. But it clearly is how it happens some of the time. So we could one-off this. We could say, that's just an outlier. That's a data point we don't need to include. Or we could say, man, Luke included this for some reason. It wasn't Paul, and it's not a believer. He doesn't say the city clerk stands up as a believer. But what the city clerk does is fulfill what Jesus had taught. In Matthew 5:9, Sermon on the Mount, do you remember what he said? Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called what? Sons of God. He says, ultimately, the peacemakers in the situation should have been those who worship and follow God. The city clerk does it because he knows it's necessary, because he knows there's no one else to do it. And so he stands up and he says, I'm going to bring the peace in this situation. Because this is unreasonable. People are unreasonable, and it's only going to escalate, and it's only going to hurt more people, so it has to be stopped now. But Jesus wasn't the only one to teach it. See, Paul would write later to the Romans, and he would say to them, this is important in 14:19. He says, so then let us pursue what promotes peace and what builds one another up. builds up one another, right? What's most important for us is to be at peace with one another, is for us to be reconciled to one another, is for us to be right with one another. And why? Because Hebrews clarifies it. He says in 12:14, pursue peace with everyone and holiness. Without it, no one will see the Lord. That's really the underlying goal reason, is because when peace is brought, we know the only one that truly brings lasting peace is the Lord. And so anyone who's acting under the Lord's guidance and leading and the Lord's power and bringing peace to a situation is a representation of the Lord. It's a valuable thing for us to do. And yet we're told time and time again in Scripture we should be peacemakers. We should be ones that go into conflict and attempt this. And so many of us are like, yes, that person should do it. Right? Some of our personalities don't lend ourselves well to conflict. We think, man, I'm too soft-spoken, I'm too kind, it's not going to turn out well. That person's outspoken, they should do it. Not realizing that the person we're electing is probably going to make more conflict as a result. They're going to be like, oh, nothing ventured, yeah, let's get in there. There's something to gain. No. That's not about it. Sometimes the people that God's calling up are the people who feel like they're least qualified, least capable. They're the ones who want to engage at the least. They're like, that's for someone else. I'd rather not. And yet that's ultimately what's needed in our world today, is people who will bring peace. Look at all the conflict that we have all around us. We need those who will bring peace. Now, here's the weird thing about the juxtaposition in this passage with these two different things happening is those who are most likely to jump into a conflict and try and fix it are most of the time those who need it least. They're the people that need to be told, no, it's not about you. You can't do it. And at that point, when you tell someone they can't do it and they think they can, what are they going to do? They're going to prove it. Let me prove it now, okay? So that's why those of you who are the venturer ones, that you invited someone to tell you no, I hope you did that. Here's the hardest part now. You actually have to listen to them. You can say, I want you to tell me no. That's nice, that's your opinion. I'm going on away anyways. Right? It does no good if every time we put up a guardrail, we just smash through it when it's inconvenient. We end up just doing more damage in that time. And so if you're going to ask someone to tell you no, you have to be humble enough to listen to them. Okay, so someone who's reminding you that you're not the one to deal with it, listen to them. But if you are one who generally keeps calm in the situation, it doesn't mean you have to be apathetic or inactive. In fact, in our world today, what we need is people who will stand up, people who will speak reasonably, people who will keep a level head, and they'll speak to people and bring resolution to conflict. We need people who will be peacemakers. And that's because that ultimately is what Christ did for us, is it not? When it talks about him reconciling us to us, making peace in our relationship with God, it is about us being right with God first and foremost, and then us making it right with other people. It's the both and. You have to be right with God, and then you can make other people right in their situation and circumstance, because it's not really about you. You are not the main character either way. And some of you struggle with it, and some of you do not, and some of us are in between, and there's times when we do, and there's times that we don't. But God has something for all of us to do, because in a world of chaos and conflict, we need those who will bring peace. We need those who will be like this city clerk. And the city clerk does it without even having the Spirit's power. If conflict can end that simply, why are we so conflict averse? Sometimes the problem is in our heads, it's in our minds. We've built it up so much more than it needs to be, when it simply could be a word to someone. Don't delay, don't wait. Bring peace in conflict, because people are hurting themselves and others. I want to give you an opportunity to do this. I know I already gave you an opportunity to ask for someone, but here's what I want to give you the opportunity to do. We're going to do a last song, and during this song, I want to give you the opportunity, first of all, if you've fallen into the mindset that you are the main character in this narrative, I want to remind you, if you are a believer, the main character is Christ. And you are as much of a main character as you are a representative of him. And if you've gotten that backwards, if you've gotten that wrong, come to the altar. Lay yourself before him and say, God, it's not about me, it's about you, and I want to live that way every single day. Get right with him, reconcile, make right relationship with God. Jesus died on the cross so that we could have that ability. And we come to before him and we say, yes, I need that. But for those of you who are not doing that, you're the conflict-averse ones. You're probably right with God and you're probably right with some others. But maybe you're not, or maybe you're right with two people that are wrong with each other. Maybe you are the one that gets to look from the outside at a conflict and see two of your friends or two of your relatives or someone else who is fighting in conflict. Their emotions are riding high. And guess what you are? You're the calm, level-headed one. And you're saying, it's not my place. No, it is your place. Because they're only going to hurt each other further. It really is your place to step in and love and say, it's not about me. It's about making you two right with each other. And so the encouragement is during this next song, if there is a conflict either you're a part of or you're witnessing, reach out to that person during the song. Say, let's meet this week. Let's get together. Don't delay, because if you wait till after the song's over, after I prayed, after you're in your Sunday school classes, or after you've listened to the Young Life presentation, you're not going to remember and you're not going to do it. Don't delay. I mean, right now, during this next song, if you have a conflict in your life or a conflict that you have observed, start to address it. It's so important. It's not worth letting go any further. Let's pray and then respond as the Lord leads. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for your word. I thank you for the truth that's found within. I thank you that you are the one who brings peace, Lord, that it's really not about us. Lord, that's a comfort to those of us who are conflict averse, because ultimately we're not the one who has to make it right. We're just the ones through whom you're going to work. And so, God, I pray that for those of us who have made ourselves the main character, Lord, that we would humbly come before you and you would remind us that it's about you, Lord, and we would commit ourselves to living that way. Lord, for those of us who have conflict in our life or have witnessed conflict between others, Lord, I pray that you would move us to be peacemakers, to be like Christ in that way, Lord, to bring reconciliation. And so, God, I pray that none of us would leave here idly, Lord, that we would leave here seeking, that we would leave here acting, that we'd leave here doing, Lord, knowing that ultimately, God, obedience to you is lived out through what we do, the way we interact with each other. Our love is lived out in that way. God, go before us in each of these things, Lord. Bring us to exactly where you need us to be and use us, not for our glory, but for yours. I pray these things in the great, the glorious, awesome, and powerful name of your Son, Jesus Christ.